like it's been a great flow. Like people are asking questions. He had shared that it doesn't seem like people feel that they can't speak up. So I know it's harder because you're not in the same room. It's hard to tell if someone's not getting it, but just wanted to throw that out there. And again, I'm just really excited about the progress you guys are making. And just excited to see you guys progress and see the awesome work on the capstones. That was all I had, and it looks like Max is back with his awesome views. All right, cool. All right, well, I'm gonna jump off, guys. You guys have a great class tonight. Okay.
Thanks, Jason. Okay, welcome back. As standard, let's do stand up. What did we cover yesterday? Carolyn threw out that it's all coming together, that it's a little less hectic, which is good. That's what we're aiming for. Latonia said buttons. What about buttons, Latonia?
Well, we worked on adding them in, working with on-click, delete, the different features, edit. That's another big one we did.
Yep, starting to tie in the notion of events with functions and parameters. So want to go over a quick overview of functions again and what those parentheses are really doing, to hopefully tie that all together before we dive back into our to-do list and the punch list and all of that stuff. Phobelia is a good reminder. Arrays can have any type of data. We started putting strings into that data, but we are going to convert that to objects tonight and talk about why we are using an object and how we can store multiple pieces of information with it. Anything else that we covered yesterday that kind of stuck out to you, or something that we went over that kind of made your eyes gloss over, or anything where something clicked and you're like, oh, now I get it? Okay. Brandy threw out iterations can be simplified by defining something. By defining I. Sorry, I thought you sent the message early and I was like defining, and then I realized the iterator. Yeah, so definitely defining I. That is a trick that you will pick up from different software developers. And you'll see what that I is. And so one of my personal favorites is to not use I, not use single letter variables, and actually name the variable that you're looping over so you can reference it a lot more easily. That is less important when you only have a single loop, but you will find there are times that you need to make a loop inside of a loop. And so now instead of just I, now you have I and J. And then you have I, J, K, and then you're like, wait, which is J? Am I looping over? It's easy to lose track of that. So definitely naming variables in your loops a good idea. Carolyn had a question between the $ and the parentheses. I'm guessing you meant $ and the curly braces. Is that correct? Okay. So we will go over that. That is called a template literal. Very technical name. I had a job interview years ago that said, hey, can you tell me what a template literal is? And I said, nope, no idea. And they said, hint, it has something to do with backticks. And I went, oh, a template literal, that's what it's called. So you can inject variable information directly into your code without having to concatenate a string. So we will do a quick example of that and break that down as well. And Latonia threw out difference between arrays and objects. We are going to get a very in-depth example of that tonight. So speaking about that, we are going to go over the template literal before I forget. We're going to do a quick little review of function and what the parentheses are doing. I'm going to take the bone away from my dog that is driving me crazy. So sorry if you hear gnawing in the background. That's what it is.
Let her have it.
She is terrific at having zero interest in that bone all day until I saw her talking. And she knows when I'm talking to myself. This is the world's smartest dog. If I'm coding and talking to myself, not going at the bone. But as soon as I'm in a meeting, there she is on the bone.
That's because she wants to participate too.
Function overview, template literal overview. We're going to go back to our to-do list and we're going to make the transformation from an array to an array of objects. And then we are going to finish up anything that is on that list. We are going to do an example of storing data. So schools and teachers and students, and how do we access information that's stored several levels deep? I have been known to send 1 or 2 objects to Karen that have data nested 9 or 10 levels deep, and just makes your head hurt when you get that far deep into it. So for beginner developers, it's one of those things that you struggle with and you fight with until you get it. And then once you do get it, super easy. And you're like, oh, it doesn't matter how nested that data is. I can get down to that level and access it. Going to go over that. And then we are going to pretty up our to-do list app. So we're going to dive back into Bootstrap a little bit, go over those components, make sure that HTML isn't getting too far out of your heads, and make sure that you are keeping up with that and using components and all of that fun stuff. Any questions about what we're working on? Any questions about things you saw in the news? Any questions about upcoming curriculum stuff? Opening the floor up. Carolyn, I try. I do a daily stand-up with my team, and not only is it for me to touch base with all of my staff and making sure I know what they are working on, but when I do stand up, it is super helpful for me because I spend 10 minutes at every morning just pulling things together. All right, let's take a moment and say what we got done yesterday and share that accomplishment. And then also, what are we doing today, right? Because otherwise you have this to-do list that is a mile long. And the point of stand-up is just to break it out and say, this is what I'm going to commit to getting done today. And so if you are able to break that out, now all of a sudden, by the time you get to the end of your day, you are able to say, look at these 5 things that popped up that I didn't think were going to happen. Let me document that for tomorrow's stand-up, but also let me figure out, what we've gotten done. So project management and being a developer, it's kind of a necessary evil. A lot of people hate doing project management. But when you are working on a project as complex as software, you need to just be able to keep an eye on all of that. And in larger companies, it is traditional for a team of around 8 developers to have a project manager on the team and also a manager of the entire team. And that project manager's job, full-time job, is just to manage those 8-ish developers and make sure that they have a punch list of things to work on. So that's why I try and get stand-up built in. That's why I try and do a little project planning every night before we dive into things, just because it is very much a real world thing that you can be surprised of coming out and working in that environment.
So I kind of want to add something a little bit to that. If you guys are thinking that you have to know everything, you won't. You will not know everything. you're going to look things up. There's going to be code where you're like, oh, I know what this is, and you'll be able to code it without any issues. There's other code you're going to have to look it up in order to know how to do it. So try not to think, oh my God, I need to know this so that I can just code it. You're going to look things up. You're going to use Google all the time. I do it. I can't speak for Max. I don't know, but I would maybe guess that there's times where he looks things up, especially when it comes to like CSS. You can't know all of that. As functions go on, you'll be like, oh, right, I need to do this with my function, and maybe you'll have to look up to remember how to do some of it. So I don't want you to think that looking things up is bad. It's not. You're going to do it all the time. I do it.
And I have walked out of job interviews who have given a coding test and not let me use Google in the middle of the interview, because I said, seriously, ask your team, how many of your developers would you say, oh no, you can't use Google at work? Like, that's just such a foreign concept, because there are so many things that we're teaching. You're just going to be like, inner HTML or HTML, or there was something we had to do. It was like, get something by ID, right? And so I'm going to share my screen and just give a little example of, if you forget what that document.getElement by ID is, look for it. Say JavaScript, and we'll intentionally be vague here. We'll say get HTML element, right? And just something as vague as that will come up. W3 Schools is a great resource. Stack Overflow, another great resource. And sometimes you will find DigitalOcean, another great resource. And so it just goes on and on. But notice get elements by tag name, get element by ID method. Oh, wait, that sounds familiar. So when we pop that open, it's going to give you help, and it's going to show you a code example of get element by ID. Okay, great. We've got that. We remembered, oh, we don't put the pound sign in the parameter, or whatever helps. Now we can go back and we can say, update HTML with JavaScript. Right? Something as vague as, I want to get something to show up in my HTML. How do I do that? And right at the top, W3 Schools. That was a helpful link last time. Changing HTML. Document.write. There's something that we haven't used, but we could. And if I scroll down a little bit, changing HTML content. Oh, here's this document.getElement by ID that we used. And oh, they're using inner HTML, and I can see an example of that as well. And so looking things up, I jokingly said to Karen, it's a miracle I hadn't had to look anything up as I was coding things out, because I use React, and React is built all in JavaScript. But a lot of those methods of updating the HTML, you'll learn of ways that they are tightly integrated with the data in the state, and it will auto update the HTML for you. And so when I was trying to remember how to do all of that, I know a for loop on like the back of my hand, right? I have that for const variable name of array just baked into my mind. But even something as simple as that, just do a search for JavaScript for of, and hit enter. First 2 or 3 results, all going to be things that help you remember that syntax. So the good news is you kind of just learn it through osmosis. The more you use it, the more ends up sticking in your head. And you those little things like inner HTML, you're like, was the HTML capitalized or not? That is a quick enough thing to Google and immediately get that answer. So definitely Google is your friend. And in the workplace, even senior devs are still looking things up all the time. There are methods that I know exist, and I can't remember the parameters. And so those are, I just Google that. I do a, .map array JavaScript search. And first thing that comes up, oh, that's right. The parameter is the iterators, the first thing that you pass in. Oh, and look, you get access to the index. I didn't know it could do that. Those little things, Google is definitely your friend. And Carolyn threw out a great point. You know, she used to be in the library or information professional, and literally your entire job there, right? Looking things up. So yeah, using your resources definitely super important. Latonia, you had a question about when to inline code and when not to. Could you give me a little more context on what you mean by inlining your code? Like putting
I just remember going to the hack days and learning that you're not supposed to inline code, like you're supposed to have a separate sheet. And then like going through the exercises and like Karen was helping me on my .dev site. I just realized like some of that stuff is inline coding, and I just wasn't sure if I was understanding what I was actually doing or if I was actually inline coding. So I'm just confused about when you do and don't.
Sure. So let me tackle that because that's a quicker answer. Inline coding is really saying, hey, your JavaScript really doesn't belong in HTML. So put that in its own separate file. Hey, your style sheets don't really belong in your HTML. So put that in separate CSS. So what they're basically saying here is, my VS Code would like to be any slower tonight. That would be great. Let's try. Okay. So basically what it's saying is this is all of our JavaScript, right? We're getting to the point where we can look at this and easily say, this is JavaScript, this is an HTML. But there's nothing preventing us from copying this and going up to our index.html, taking our script tag, and we could comment that out and just say script and dump everything in there. And because we have told our HTML, hey, whatever is in this script tag, it now knows that's JavaScript, all of this will run completely fine. So if I pop this open in my browser, you will find that if we type something in and hit add to do, it works fine. And we can edit it and we can, make our changes and everything still works. And so basically what it is saying there is don't inline your JavaScript, keep your JavaScript in a separate file. So I'm going to back that out and I'm going to do that. Now, while it is not common to see inline JavaScript, it is very common to see inline CSS styling. So something up here, like our My To-Do List app, we know we can go to our style.css and say H1 color pink and save that and come over here and refresh and we get our pink. But we could also come over to our H1 and say style equals, and because we said it, a style's coming your way, we could do color pink and save and refresh and it stays pink, or we can just prove that that's working. We'll go to green. And that goes to green. So the for years and years and years, advice, don't inline your styles, right? Don't inline your JavaScript. Keep it separate so you can navigate your code easier. React took that advice and threw it right out the window and said, new thing we're doing, we're going back to inlining our styles and we're going back to inlining our JavaScript. And everyone was like, what? No, we haven't done that for 25 years. Why would we go back to that? And React says that we break everything out into their own components. So now on the React page, you may have a component called headline. You may have a component called list. You may have a component called, new to do form. And because you break things out in a separate component, it is easier to cluster them together and say, okay, the functionality around this add new to do, we're going to put that button in the form. And so in React, it allows us to write our HTML for the form and write our JavaScript right alongside of it to make that on submit work. And it allows us to kind of break out our styles and very easily use JavaScript objects to set our styles using CSS. And so it's a little bit different. And so while the past 25 years of advice has been don't inline, and while if you're writing what is called vanilla HTML, JavaScript, or CSS, that still holds true, not to inline. When you're using a newer framework like React, and Karen may be able to speak on this with Angular, I think Angular still has a pretty strong separation of files. But in React kind of bucks the trend and goes back to inlining things is okay. And that is just because that's the way React is built. Okay. So let's talk about a little bit about functions. And then I believe we will be able to get back to our to-do list app and dive into objects. So in my JavaScript here, let's just play around at the bottom of the file. So if we say const number equals 5, right? And then we say const number 2 equals 6. When we come down here and we say something like number and save it, JavaScript is, if we go over to our console and refresh here and open the console, it's like number. Well, it's not an error, but you didn't tell me anything to do with the number. You just told me number, right? Like, what do you want me to do with that? Well, we could console.log the number, and now all of a sudden it goes, oh, I understand. You want me to print out the 5. But if we just say number, it's just going to sit there and hang out, right? That may seem like a, well, no duh, that makes sense. The same thing goes with these functions. If we call this function called update HTML, and we just say update HTML, it's like, that's a variable name, right? Or a function name. It's like, what do you want me to do with that? So if we actually console log out the function, you're going to see it prints out all the code that is inside the function, right? And so it's basically saying all you're doing is referencing a variable here. If you would like me to actually update the HTML and run the code in that function, you then need to add those parentheses. And those parentheses are what is telling the JavaScript, okay, instead of just referencing that name, actually run the code that is inside the function. So now if we save that and refresh, you'll see it console logged out undefined because it's running the code. But you'll notice up at the top, our to-do list that was there, our dummy placeholder information is now gone because it's actually running that HTML, update HTML method because we added those parentheses. So the parentheses are doing one of two things. One, they're telling it actually run this function instead of just referencing it by name, but it's also giving us the opportunity to pass in an additional parameter. And the place that we used that parameter was the index, right? Here we said, okay, when we press the edit button, pass in the index as a parameter. And so here, function edit button press index, we used index coming in to then tell it, hey, go to the list and update this specific item in the list. And so the reason we had to do that was edit button press is its own function. It has no idea of what edit button was pressed unless we passed more information into the parameter. And so that parameter allowed us in this update HTML function where we have access to the index because we're looping over everything. That's where we passed index in as a parameter. And because we passed it in as a parameter, we were able to use it here and then actually update it in our list. And we did that both on edit and delete. Does that help explain why we use the parentheses and not only that the parentheses are for parameters, but it's also telling the JavaScript to execute that code? Does that help a little bit? Okay. Okay, great. If you guys have any syntax questions like that, definitely fire them off, because that's one of those things where it's like, it will drive you crazy until you have someone explain it to you. And then all of a sudden it will click and it will unlock so many other things with functions or the syntax or anything like that. So if you ever have a question about like, why am I using a square brace or a curly brace, or, you know, like, why can't we just give the function name there and have it just work? Definitely ask those questions. Those are all great questions. I'm remembering I promised one other thing with template literals. Actually, so I'm going to keep that code. So down here, I can console log out my first number is, right? And if I want that other number to show up, I can type in plus and then the number. And that plus.
Carolyn had a question, sorry.
Sure.
She wants to know if you should be keeping the 3 lines that you just added to the script JS file.
No, this is, you don't have to follow along with this. I mean, you can if you want code typing practice, but this is more just a playground to explain some concepts. This won't be needed in the app. Okay, so if we are in here and we say my first number is, we can add the plus in the number, and that's not actually going to do any math. It's going to concatenate the 2 strings together, right? Concatenate's a term popular in computer science for just smushing 2 things together. So if I save this and I refresh down here, it says my first number is 5. And then we have to be careful because I wanted a space after that quote, so I have to add that here. Okay, well, now if I want the thing to say after that, and my second number is, right, then I put a space and I have to plus again, I have to add that quote. I can say number 2, and then, oh, I want a period to show up after that. So I have to add another string and add the period in, right? So I can save that. I can refresh and it says my first number is 5 and my second number is 6. Okay, that's great. But it is very common to have something like this where we need to add in a bunch of variables, right? And it gets kind of tedious to have all those opening quotes and the closing quotes and adding those things in. So what a template literal allows us to do is say, hey, instead of using double quotes or single quotes, which JavaScript kind of pretty much always treats the same way, we're going to use the backtick instead, that key above the tab key. And so a backtick is handled, it's treated very much like a string, but JavaScript is actually treating it as a template literal. So when the literal part, you don't have to worry about, but the template, how does the template work? Well, you say, oh, I'm going to define this out. And then when we use that template, it will drop in the information we care about, right? To go a little old school, it's kind of like a mail merge, right? I'm going to define out these fields on envelope. And when I pass in a database, it's going to be able to drop that information in for me. Same thing goes for the template literal. We can treat everything inside those backticks as a string, but now whenever we want to reference a variable, we can use $ and the curly braces. And what that is going to do is say, okay, take a break from the string and go evaluate out whatever information is inside of there and dump in that result. So I can type in number, and then right outside of my curly braces, I can just do a period and a space and say, and my second number is, and then I can do my $ and curly braces again and say number 2, and then put my period right outside. And now you notice how much cleaner this one console log is, where we're just dumping in number 1 and number 2, but it's going to print the same exact thing. So if I come over here and refresh, my first number is 5 and my second number is 6, right? And so that just makes it easier to read and still has the ability to access those variables. So if we go back up to where we use this in our code last, up here we had our edit button pressed, right? And what we were doing is we were generating out our HTML. So our HTML needed 3 pieces of dynamic information to be added into the string. We had to add in our to-do task, the actual text that we wanted to show up. We had to add in our onClick, and our onClick was referencing edit button fine. But when we passed in the index, we said, hey, string, take a break from just typing in letters. I'm going to pass you in something dynamic. So when that code runs, we're actually going to dump in the index. And so to see all of this in action, we can easily console log out our HTML to update. And if I refresh here and type in ABC and hit add to do, you'll notice my string came out very tiny. Let me blow that up. You'll notice my string came out, but the edit button press, there is no $ curly brace there anymore. Instead, it's just the value of the index. And same goes for my ABC. It's not $ curly brace to do item. The string just built itself, the template built itself into a string that had the values in it. Okay, other questions? Is that helpful? Carolyn, good question. Yeah, sometimes it can make it harder to troubleshoot, but not much harder than if you were building the string and concatenating it manually. So if I did something in here, like I missed a letter and save that, when I refresh and run that code, it's still going to give me reference error INDX is not defined. That would be the same exact error that we would get if we did the string the old-fashioned way of having the string, having plus, adding the variable in, and then keep going. So it normally isn't harder to debug. Generating this HTML in a string is sometimes harder to debug because you notice we don't have any highlighting going on here that we would normally see in our HTML, right? Where our list item is a different color and then the text of it. So that can definitely get a little trickier. The good news is React uses a language called JSX, which it's like if HTML and JavaScript had a baby, that is what JSX is like. It lets you interchangeably write your HTML and your JavaScript without it getting confusing. And so that is not normally a concern. And Kyle, that is a good point. If we take out our backticks here and just make them a string, you'll notice VS Code right off the bat is unhappy with me. And that is because strings don't support multiple lines. And that is another benefit of a template literal that I forgot to mention. So I would actually have to put this code all up on the same line, and then VS Code won't be angry with me. So even if we get it all up on one line there and refresh, what you're going to see if we console log out our HTML to update and refresh and type something in, we get unexpected identifier on line 36. So it is, it's not happy because I used double quotes inside of the string that I was creating. And so now all of a sudden it thinks the end of the string is here, not over here. So let me just convert that to a single quote. Okay, now it should work. Refresh, ABC, add to do. And so you'll notice because we didn't use that template literal, it literally has $index still in the string. And that's clearly not what we want, right? We wanted to put that value in there. So the way you would fix that is you would start breaking up the string and using pluses. But again, that just goes back to why the template literal is helpful. So I'm going to put that code back. Okay. I believe that was it for off the cuff questions. Were there any questions that I said I was going to get to and didn't?
You said you were going to do a function overview. Did you do that already?
Yeah, that was down here when we were console logging out the function name as opposed to the function with the parentheses.
I'm sorry, I froze up. What did you say?
I said that was when we had the function and we just like added, we had two numbers and we console logged out the numbers. And the, why we put the parentheses in and what happens if we don't. Any other questions? You have a question, Carolyn? Oh, okay.
Or I can just say it if you don't mind. Yeah, going back and reviewing like from the beginning of time. Some of the stuff that we did with Gus and everything, I'll say, let X equal 5.
Yep.
But then you go into this whole thing where you're talking about, X is less than 1 and equal to this and plus. And first of all, I don't understand why we said let it equal 5, because we did all this other bizarre stuff with it. And the function either broke or continued or whatever happened based on very different logic and numbers than that initial thing.
Yes. And so we kind of did something similar in our JavaScript so far, where we had all the way up at the top, let to-do list equal empty array. And the reason we're doing that is because we know we're going to be working with a list. And so we knew, hey, even it's starting without anything in it, but just telling the computer, hey, it is a array is what allows us then in our add new task to call push, right? And so the reason why we have to do it up here is because if we declared it inside the function, every time we added a new task, it would start a new list for us. So we moved this outside of the scope all the way up at the top to say, hey, to-do list is going to be an array. And because we defined it out there, now whenever we reference to-do list inside of a function, it's always going to be able to go up and reference this to-do list. So I can write out some code just off the top of my head. At work, we're integrating with a blood pressure cuff. So when you take your blood pressure and are having a chat with Alexa, she can say, hey, your blood pressure seems to be a little high today, or hey, your blood pressure is very high today, or hey, your blood pressure is spot on, right? Well, your blood pressure range is a number. It's going to be anything, 120 over 80 is ideal, but then we may say something different if you're between 120 and 140, and say something different if you're between 140 and 180, right? And so our software, that data comes in, and we don't want to have our writer say if the number is 121 or 122 or 123 or 124. So that is when we will do something with multiple if statements. So we'll say something like let blood pressure equal 140, right? And that information comes in dynamically into our software, but we'll just use that let. And then we can say something like, if blood pressure is under 120, console.log, good job. Else, if blood pressure is greater or equal to 120 and blood pressure is less than 140, less than or equal to 140, console log a little high, and then we can just start copying and pasting our code. And Latonia, to your point, this is a place where I have no problem copying and pasting because I already wrote it. And so I'm just going to go in and start changing the numbers to say 140 to, we'll just say if it's greater than 140, say very high.
The reason you chose 140 in the beginning, let blood pressure equal, is because you knew that was going to be like your cap?
Not necessarily. So
you could have said any number up there and it wouldn't matter?
Yeah. So To give you a good example of we're partnering with another company who is providing us the blood pressure number, right? And so that integration took them 2 weeks to get us the information about how we could go retrieve that information. But I wanted to have this done ahead of time. So when they handed us the information, I could easily break it out into the ranges and all of that. So what, in our code that we ended up updating today, that information actually came in from a REST API, which Gus is going to go over with you, of how you get information from other sources and can pull that in. But to test this, I wanted to make sure the ranges were working. So I just said, let blood pressure equal this number that we're starting with, right? So when I save this and I come in and I refresh my page, I get a little high. But that isn't enough for me to just go, oh, okay, I'm done. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to, put it at 119 and save it and make sure that it comes out as good job. And then I'm going to come back in and modify it one more time and make it 130 and refresh, and I get a little high. So you want to test every condition of your if statement and make sure they are all firing when you think they are firing, because it is very easy to do something like you don't have your less than or equal to sign. So you say if it's under 120 or over 120, right? And so we could do something like this. And if I type in 120, well, 120 isn't less than 120 and it's not greater than 120. It's equal to 120. So now when I refresh my code, I get very high. And I'm like, well, that's not what I wanted. I didn't want very high. Well, I got very high because that's the else case. If this isn't true and if this isn't true, I'm always going to get this. And so without having that let number and being able to test with it, I wouldn't have known that my if wasn't working.
So it does matter what number you choose.
Yeah, the point of that number is to test all of your if statement. The point of the number up here is to test each condition of your if to make sure you're getting the right output.
So sometimes when you test, like you showed, you might have to change that number.
Correct.
So in the exercises we did, we started with, let x equal 5 or whatever. And then we went and did our thing. It's like there probably could have been another number, but it just seemed logical, I guess, to use that one.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't figure that out because I thought in that case, or const equals or whatever, well, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be 5.
Yeah, it's kind of a, if you're doing like a math problem and you're trying to figure out like, is this number evenly divisible by another number? That's when you could do like your const divider equals 5, right? And then you can do your percent sign for the modulus operator and figure out if there's a remainder. So the picking a variable value out of thin air is not something you commonly do in real life programming. But this was a good example of, I didn't have the actual blood pressure information. I knew that number was going to come in dynamically from the internet, but at the same time, my boss had already told me, hey, here are the 5 ranges that I want, and I want to be able to write, content against those 5 ranges.
Feedback to the user. Yeah.
And present it back to the user without having to say every single number here, because what happens if that number comes in and there's a decimal in it and it's like, oh, we really want to write against ranges. 2 good questions from Shaw and Dominique. Dominique wanted to know, how do I do the equal greater than sign? That is just the arrows that you would use in HTML above the period and comma. So it is literally just the arrow, left pointing arrow or right pointing arrow. Left pointing arrow is on the comma key, right, less than, and then same for the greater than. I actually have something called font ligatures enabled in my VS Code, which is somewhat of a complex topic. But basically right here, you see how I have that less than? And if I type the character equal right after it, you see how it puts the line under the less than? What my VS Code is doing is it's actually combining two symbols, two characters together to show that. That is something that I find super helpful when I am writing my code, because instead of looking at less than equal, which doesn't really make sense, but the less than with the arrow or the slash underneath it, that to my math brain says less than or equal to. So it is something that I teeter with whether or not it's a good thing for someone just getting started in development, because you want to see the raw syntax out. Another example of that, I'm not sure if Gus went over arrow syntax to create a function. So we could create a function like reset to do's 2 is equal to, and we do our empty parentheses, and then we type an equal arrow and the an equal sign and a right facing arrow. And you notice on mine that actually turned it to 2 lines with the arrow on it. That is the font ligature. So let me see if I can easily turn that off just to show you what is actually getting typed. So now if you look at that same code, you'll see that it's an equal and the arrow sign, and then same for down here, you'll see it's less than equal. So the font ligature is something that is just combining those two together. And then it does a similar thing up here for, oh, where did I notice it? I can't remember where I noticed it. But yeah, that's what the font ligature is doing, is it's just combining those two symbols together into a symbol that looks more like an arrow or the less than equal to there. Shaw, you asked a question about my code automatically added a semicolon on line 71. I have code set up to run. It's something called Prettier. Prettier is something that has becoming more and more popular. It's called it's known as an opinionated code formatter. And basically what it does is if I have something that's getting really long, so if I have all of this up on one line and I have something like the missing semicolon, whenever I hit Command S, it formats my code for me automatically. And it adds that semicolon in and starts wrapping the code so it's on multiple lines. Same thing for like if I forget the space after a for loop, that space doesn't matter to the computer, but it makes the code easier to read and more consistent. So when I save my file, you notice it automatically spaced that out for me. Prettier is something, again, that I go back and forth on of like, when do we tell you guys as students about code formatters? I struggle to write code now without a code formatter because I rely it to automatically wrap code onto multiple lines for me, and to make sure my indentation is right. However, I'm normally pretty good about getting my opening and my curly closing braces to line up, and it's just natural for me to get my cursor position in the right spot and get my indentation right. So Prettier is one of those things where I can't blanket say, go turn it on. But if you are interested in it, it is built into VS Code. And it is the same thing if you go, there is something in one of these menus that will say format document. I'm blanking on where it is. I can't remember what they call it in VS Code. But basically, I have my VS Code configured whenever I hit the save button to automatically run Prettier. And that's where those semicolons came from and why my indentation just automatically pops right into place. And again, it's one of those things where I use it as a developer. I'm not going to tell you explicitly not to turn it on, but there is definitely value in getting your syntax down and feeling confident typing your syntax before you have something like prettier turned on. Otherwise, you will get that why is this indenting? I didn't tell it to indent over there. And it's because you've got a curly brace in the wrong section and it just doesn't know any better. So it's a double-edged sword of whether you would like it on or not. Mel, good question on arrow functions. I'm catching up. Arrow functions are a part of something called ES6, also known as ES 2020 or ECMA script 2020. So ECMA script is the formal name for JavaScript. There was some trademark or some open source reason around the name JavaScript where they couldn't officially call it JavaScript. And so the reason whenever you see official documentation coming from the board that runs JavaScript language itself, they will never call it JavaScript. They will call it ECMA script or ECMA script. Anyway, long story short, there are multiple versions of JavaScript. Let and const are another part of ES5 or ES6, where they said, okay, var is great. We've used var for years. Your code's not gonna break if you still leave vars in it. But hey, there's this notion of, are you creating a variable that you can edit with a let, or are you creating a constant variable that you're not gonna edit with const? And that has a lot of benefits for your code. That makes your code run better under the hood. That also can throw out a warning if you're saying, hey, initially I wasn't planning of this variable ever changing. And then in my code, I did end up changing it. And that could have some unintended consequences. So when I make my variable, I'm going to think about whether or not this is going to change. If it is, I make it a let. If it isn't, I make it a const. And then further down the road, if I do change that const, my code's going to give me a warning and give me a heads up about that. Shaul, thank you for sharing that. Settings. Mine's under preferences and then settings. And then if you do a search for format on save, not only will you get a checkbox here, but you'll have an opportunity to change your code formatter. Again, I'm not suggesting that you turn that on, but I am not denying that that is an option to use. It's very hypocritical of me to say don't use it when it is a tool that I rely on. But I also think there is value in you guys getting syntax down and then going to turn something like that on. So anyway, back to the arrow functions. Arrow functions are a part of ES5 or ES6. ES6 came out in 2020. It is very common for people to use arrow functions. Arrow functions help with the notion of this and make it, we're getting a little complicated here, but there is this notion of binding your function so you are able to access this. And unless you use an arrow function, this won't be bound to the function. I know that makes absolutely zero sense now. And fortunately, Joey's coming in to teach you guys React, and I'm going to let him tackle what this is, because you'll have a much better handle of this in React when you are working with class-based components versus functional components. So older code, you will not see arrow functions at all because JavaScript just didn't support them. In newer code, it is much more common to see a function written as a function written like this, as opposed to a function written like this. Both operate fine. Under the hood, they largely do the same thing. In here, it's completely fine to do that. You would call the function the same way, the parameters work the same way, all of that kind of stuff. But arrow functions are just the newer way of writing functions. And they do have some benefits, but that gets into this territory. And without understanding what classes are in JavaScript and how classes work, the notion of this is probably something that's a very hard concept to wrap your head around. And to be completely honest, I can't say that I've wrapped my head completely around it, and I use it all the time. So call me a bad teacher, but I won't get too far into that. And hopefully Joey, when he's going over classes, will be able to go over this a little bit more, which will make it make more sense in context. Okay. Any other questions? All great questions tonight, by the way. Loving all of these. And I see you, Shaw, going behind my back and sending out instructions. Just kidding. It's good to go over those options. Okay, any other questions? The only thing I don't like about Zoom chat is it doesn't tell you when someone is typing. So I'm always afraid to move on and then a question pops up. And definitely call me out if there's something that I've covered that still doesn't make sense to you, or something I said I was going to cover and didn't. It is very easy for things to fall out of short-term memory while teaching. Okay.
Last night you made a typo on purpose in the dummy list, and you were going to talk about some way to fix that automatically.
Yeah, I don't know quite what I was thinking there. I think I was setting us up so that we could make that edit button work or have our data preloaded. One thing that I will go over, I had that dummy data up here. Once we make that switch over to JavaScript, I think what I ended up doing was saying something like no list items yet. But as we're working with our JavaScript, sometimes it's helpful. Let me remove that color green before I forget. Sometimes it's helpful to put your dummy data in your JavaScript array. And so when we say our let to-do list equals empty array, there's nothing wrong with saying like item 1 and then like item 2 and then item typo. And now when we come over here and refresh, it still says no items. And the reasoning behind that is we put everything in the array, but what did we have to remember to do whenever we updated our array? We had to call our function update HTML, right? Which then got the list out from the HTML, set up our variable to build the string into, iterated over the array, and added all of those things in it, right? So if we come down here and we call update HTML right after we initialize our array, now we have that showing up. And now every time I refresh the page, even if I add something, it's always going to start with that. And that is very helpful when you're adding the buttons and refreshing all the time to just have that there. So now if we go into our edit and we type in item typo and hit OK, it will update the spelling on that. I'll leave that empty. Sometimes I'll just take that out and add it as a comment. So if you guys want to move that inside the bracket, you could.
I have a question.
Shoot.
So it matters then where that HTML, sorry, it matters where that update HTML is always. I mean, I know it matters inside the function, but just now that was outside, right?
Yeah. So anything inside of a function doesn't run until you call the function. Yep. Anything outside of the function will run as soon as that JavaScript is loaded in the HTML. So as soon as the HTML hits this script tag, anything outside of a function is going to run immediately. And so this even matters what line we put it on, right? If we say update HTML, and then I move this into my array, well, the array, it's actually going to error out on me because to-do list is referenced in my function, but to-do list hasn't been created yet. It's going to get created after my update HTML runs. So if I save that and refresh, it's probably going to tell me, yeah, cannot access to-do list before initialization. So a good way to think about it is like, because I put update HTML here, it is the equivalent of taking all of this code, copying it, and pasting it right there. So like when we call the function, it's going to take all the code that's inside of that function, run it, and then it's going to do whatever code is underneath it. So this code will error out the same way, because if we refresh it, cannot access to-do list of undefined, we've got a for loop going over our to-do list, and we haven't set up our to-do list yet. So all of this code that is inside the function is the same exact thing as just calling the function directly. And the way we fix update HTML not knowing what to-do list is we just put it underneath. So code always, to be careful about what I say, because I know I'm teaching later modules where I'm going to negate what I am saying in earlier modules. Code almost always executes sequentially unless it is in a for loop, and at which point it will keep executing the for loop until the for loop is done, and then it will execute the code underneath it. Or it will not execute sequentially unless you call a function, and at which point it will call the function, run all the function code, and when the function is done running, it will then run the line underneath it.
So the order does matter, because I thought someone asked this the other day and you said no.
The order of the function definition does not matter. The order of the code outside of the functions does.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter that I call update HTML and update HTML is defined down here, right? Update HTML, if I could take this code and put it all the way down here, and it would still run exactly the same.
Okay.
So it's always going to take all the functions and save all the functions in memory, and then go back and run any of the code that is outside of the functions. And that is how it knows, oh, you're calling update HTML all the way up here at the top. That's a function that you declared later, but I already know what that function is, so that's fine to run that. So order of the functions does not matter. Order of the code outside of the functions matters, just like the order of the code inside the functions also matters.
So it's like the functions are the instructions and you need the code to be in order. Otherwise, you don't know, the computer or the browser doesn't know which order to do the things that you
Correct.
instructed. Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
So with functions, it's like, I'm going to go through all your code. I'm going to remember what all the functions are and save what you want me to do when you call those functions. And then I'm going to go in and execute everything line by line.
Okay, thank you. That makes
Yep.
sense.
Any other questions? Yes, I will be dropping tonight's code for the to-do list app in Slack when we are done with it. If you guys need checkpoints where you can just copy and paste code out of it, feel free to shout that out and I will drop it in. The starting point for tonight's code is already in Slack from last night. We aren't starting anywhere different or haven't made any changes to the app so far.
Oh, I thought,
Everything I've been doing is like little playground stuff. So, you know, like the stuff with like the blood pressure at the bottom, I'm gonna delete out. That was just an example of playing around with our code. Karen's threw out a good analogy of functions are like the ingredients and the code is the steps of how to put it together. And so the order of the ingredients doesn't matter, but the order that you combine those ingredients does. Great analogy. Thank you. The item 1, 2, 3 up at the top, Carolyn, it doesn't matter if you have that in your code right now. I will update that in Slack though, just so you, yes, definitely, Mel, you want to save all of your code for your portfolio. This is definitely one that you will be proud of after we update the HTML to put in Bootstrap. Nice to know that Joey is watching. Joey threw out a good caveat that the order of functions don't matter if you use the word function, but if you use the syntax that I had down here, like const reset to-dos 2 equals, right? And then we do something like console.log myfunc1, and then we do something like myfunc2. And then we come down here and we define myfunc2. And we do that, and we console.log low. And then we come down here and we call myfunc1. Order will matter in this situation because we didn't use the word function. So now it's going to say, oh, when I go run myfunc1, execute myfunc2. Well, myfunc2 hasn't been defined yet because it's down here. So if we save that, let me just show you what the error you get is. Joey, if you're watching, I don't know what just happened there.
Maybe swap them and put myfunc2 first.
No, it's still going to do the same. Still printed it out. I thought what Joey said sounded right, of the order should matter here, and this should error out because myfunc2 hasn't been defined yet. And I feel like in React, it definitely would matter. I'm not sure. Oh, maybe do I need should be a throwback for you guys. Use strict. Nope, that didn't impact it. Well, I don't think Joey is wrong, but I'm being proven wrong in my code. Joey was saying that the order should matter here because we're using const instead of function. I'm not quite sure why that example isn't running, but he throws out a good point of order can matter if you use const and an arrow function as opposed to defining the function all at once. I totally agree with what Joey was saying. And I thought that order was going to matter. So I was kind of proven wrong by my own code. That happens. Okay, any other questions before we dive back into the to-do list app?
Yeah. Can I screen share for a second?
You sure can.
Thank you. Whoops, you cannot start screen share with the
Oh,
other participating.
Just hit OK, and then you can do it again.
Because we're all sharing. We like to share. All right. So I was just running the to-do list code just with that additional item thing and everything, and it looks good on the web page and everything. But when I checked it out in the integrated console, this is what I get.
Yeah, because you're trying to run something server side that cannot run on the server. So Node.js is only used on the server. It is only used for executing back-end code. that would execute on the server. And so because of that, it has no notion of what a document is, because document only exists in the browser. So you're telling the server, hey, go reference this thing called document, and it has no idea what a document is because it's running on the server, not in a browser. So all JavaScript that runs in the front end does not necessarily mean it will run in the back end, and same thing on the back end. JavaScript code that you write for the back end does not necessarily mean it will work in the browser fine.
So the exercises we did the first 2 weeks of the module, we, wrote code in and we used the integrated console, but that wasn't a server situation per se.
It was executing the code as if it were on a server.
But okay, so what's happening now is it actually.
We're writing JavaScript that is specifically designed to run in the browser.
Oh, okay. The browser is like a server, but it's, yeah. Got it. I think.
Joey threw out a good code sample in the Slack of when order does matter. And so hopefully that will help clear it up a little bit here. Let me just see if I can.
I put it in the chat too.
So this is when he's saying order matters. So if we use const and we say myfunc1 and then we call myfunc1 before it is defined, now when we refresh, now we get cannot access myfunc1 before initialization. And if we come over here,
you might want to share, Max.
Oh my mother.
Tisk.
Okay, so what Joey is saying is because we define this with const and an arrow function right here, the order is going to matter of the function. So if we call myfunction1 up here and refresh the page, it says cannot access myfunc1 before initialization. But if we come down here and move myfunc1 underneath, now it will run fine. So to Joey's point, the order does matter here because we are using a const and using an arrow function with it. But if we converted this to say function myfunc1 and got the syntax back to a traditional function declaration, when we refresh here, now it will have no problem of running hello. So order does matter, and it is always best practice, even when you are using functions and not arrow functions, to declare all of your functions before you call any of them. Order does matter if you use the arrow functions. It does not matter if you use the word function. Thank you, Joey, for the code sample. And that is a great example of sometimes something will be explained to you and you're like, I've got no idea what's going on. And 3 lines of code and you're like, oh, that's what you meant. And so that is I definitely send code snippets all day to my dev team and get snippets sent to me all day. And it definitely helps. And that goes for when you send any, when you send us a question of like, I'm getting this error. And we're like, that's great. We have no idea why you're getting that error unless we see the code that's running it. And that helps us get it in context and quickly get you an answer. Okay. Any other questions? We are almost to break time, and I haven't gotten to any of my planned content, which normally would drive an instructor crazy, but I love milking these questions and not getting to what I had planned. So
Really
this is
good questions.
great for me.
Oh, he's awesome. He's the best.
Less content I have to come up with next week.
Sometimes I look up my errors. Like if I get an error, I copy and paste it right into Google.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, so if we just off the top of my head, we take the last error that we had and refresh. We got uncaught reference error cannot access myfunc1 before initialization. If we just copy and paste it, sometimes you'll have to remove this myfunc1 because that will be specific to your code. But first answer when it's an error is traditionally a Stack Overflow answer. and it will give you the answer that, hey, it's not hoisted up. So basically it's saying it's not declared. We don't know what that function is yet. And so they'll give you a code snippet to help you answer it as well. So Stack Overflow, definitely your friend. And sometimes you'll find answers on Stack Overflow that only have a couple upvotes. And that's a good representation of like, oh, this is a problem that people run into all the time, and this is definitely the answer. Or maybe it doesn't have a ton of upvotes, so maybe I'll go find another Stack Overflow answer, or go back to Google and see if I can get a better answer as well.
And I don't ever copy and paste code from Stack Overflow. If it's something that I want to use, I type it out. Because they might have an error in there that you aren't seeing right away, and you paste it into your code, and then you're like, well, what the heck? This is supposed to work. Why did they say that it worked and it doesn't work? So I always type it out into my own code, because, and you may need to change it too. They have different variables, all kinds of different things in there. So.
And the reason that happens sometimes is that someone will be giving an answer on Stack Overflow, and they'll type their code right into the Stack Overflow website instead of trying to run their code, right? So they're not using an IDE. They're not getting their syntax highlighting. They're just saying like, oh, you've got a problem in your for loop. Let me just write out the correct version of this for loop quickly before they actually test it. So if they test that code, they would get a syntax error, but you will look at that as the correct answer, try and run it and figure out why it's not running. And so I've definitely been guilty of that, of like, I'm just writing my code really fast, but it would be like if you were writing your code in Microsoft Word, right? It's like, well, you have no idea if that code is actually going to run or not. And so that is oftentimes why an answer on Stack Overflow will be the right answer, but there will be like a little syntax error, or they forgot the closing curly brace or something like that. Okay, do we want to take a break a little early before we dive into back to the to-do list app, or do we want to get a little of the to-do list app done and break at 7:30? Give me a thumbs up if you want to break now. Okay, then let's get to coding. Remember to share my screen this time. So proud of myself. Okay, so let's refresh this. Let's clear out this code, because that was just a playground. And you'll hear that term a lot, like a sandbox or a playground. That just means like an area that I can throw around code, see if this is going to work. And then I'm planning on deleting all of this code and then taking whatever I learned from that playground or sandbox and using it in my actual code. So there will often be times that Scratch file is another same concept, same idea, where, you know, my boss will be like, hey, I love this new package, or, oh, we should build out a code this way, and I go, all right, well, before we bake that into our actual production code, I want to go play with that and see how good the documentation is and see what the results of it are without it impacting any of the code that we work on and actually ship out. And so I will play around with that in the playground, get an idea of how well it works, and then make the decision of, okay, I'm going to move some of this code over and actually bake it into my project. So I was just playing around in the bottom of this file because it's what I had open. But if I were doing anything for production code, or, you know, anything that I was going to ship out, I would definitely open a new file and run that file separately. Karen sent a great link called Code Sandbox, and CodePen is another one of a browser tool that you can dump code into and play around with and get your proof of concept working. And then share that out with the world too. If you wanted to, you can share a link right to your either Code Sandbox or your CodePen. And then you can always, you know, copy and paste that code into your own project, into your own local files. That both of those websites can be very helpful when getting your portfolio online, where if you have these code snippets that you would like to share with the world, You can use either one of those websites, put your code in there, save the link to it, and then link to it on your actual portfolio website or your GitHub or whatever it may be. Okay, I think I have delayed enough. I am going to jump in to, I actually don't know where I'm going to jump into. I'm going to go to my Google Docs. And pop open our to-do list app brainstorming doc. And we had add button to check off as done. But there's something lingering under the hood there. And that's this whole notion of objects in the array. So I'm going to come over here. And first, I'm going to start with my done button. My done button is going to be pretty easy, right? I'm going to go to, actually, I'm going to go to my update HTML. And we've got our edit button already and our delete button. Now, some people would take the easy way out and say, oh, when something is done, just delete it. I personally hate it when to-do list apps do that because I want some notion of a sense of accomplishment. I got that done, and I may need to reference that a couple days later to see, oh, I actually finished that, or, oh, I forgot to even put that on my to-do list. So I personally would like a line to show up whenever I have something done on my list. But that gets us into this problem of, well, all we have in the array is the name of the task. We don't have anything in there where we can say that is done, right? So all different kinds of data structures here. I don't think there is any notion of a correct data structure, but there are definitely multiple solutions to this. So we could have a second array that tracked our done items, right? And so let's start there. Yeah, let's start there. So we're going to start not using an object. We're just going to have two separate arrays. So I'm going to take my button and I'm going to copy and paste it. And I'm going to add the word done to it. And then I'm going to come over to delete button pressed and change that to done button pressed. Now, I still need my index in there, right? Because we need to know what thing is getting clicked on that is done. But because we already did the work with entries and our loop to pull out index, we don't need to go through any of that work. What we do need to do is we need to come down here. We need to make our new function that says done button press and have our index. And whenever I make a new function, whenever I'm doing an on click, I like to just start with a console log test. And maybe we can also console log out the index of the parameter. And I like to pump the brakes there and say, all right, is this working? Is my done button showing up? Is it linked to the function? Is it passing through my index? Okay. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to refresh. I get my done button automatically. And because we still have our dummy data up at the top, it's helping us not having to add something to the list before we can click the done button. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to hit done. And I get test and I get 2. And so why is it 2? Again, because arrays are 0 indexed. So this is technically the 0 index in our list. This is the first and this is the second. So we just proved our on click is working and we know we have access to the index. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say let done items equals empty array. Okay. And then I am going to come back to our done button pressed. And what I am going to say is I'm going to make a holder variable, right? This notion of I need to hold on to this before I modify the original array. So I'm going to say const done task equals to do list index, index with square brackets. So I'm going into my array and I'm pulling that value out of the array. And I'm going to console log out my done task. And then I'm going to remove that item from our array because eventually we're going to push it into our completed array. So what method do I use to remove an item from the array? The answer is already on the screen. Splice. You got it. So I'm just going to actually copy and paste this whole line from our delete button pressed. Okay. And what do we do when we update the array?
We update the HTML.
Update our HTML. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to click on done. Okay. Console logged out item 3 and it hit done. But the thing you will find with computers is they are annoyingly good at doing exactly what you tell them to and nothing else. So let's go back to our code. We grabbed the done task and we verified that we have access to it. We removed it from our to-do list and we updated our HTML. What did we not do?
Tell it to display.
2 parts. We didn't tell it to display. We also didn't tell it to store it in the done items, right? So when we come down here, we can say done items dot push, and we're pushing in the done task, right? Now, if we just said to-do list index here, it wouldn't push the right thing in because we had already spliced it out of the array. And so what we do is we grab access to this done task and we save it in a separate variable. So when we modify the array of the to-do list item, we still have access to this done task. So there are cleaner ways of writing this code. I'm being purposely verbose so you guys can see kind of the order of operations of what's going on there. So I'm going to remove our console log. We have it in our done items, and I'm going to console log out now our done items. So I come over here, I refresh, I click on done. All right, now I've got my done item in the done array, but nothing is showing up here. Why not?
Did you update HTML?
We updated the HTML, but we didn't update the update HTML function.
Yeah, there you go.
So if we come down here, we've got our for loop and it's running over our to-do list, but our for loop isn't running over our list of done items. So we're going to just copy and paste that whole block, that whole for loop. And instead of to-do list, we're going to say done items. Okay, so I save that. I come over. We should be good and update our variable names. This will technically work, but it says to do task here, right? We should update our variables and our loop to be more accurate of what we're looping over. So I'm going to say done item and then put done item in there. And when an item is done, we don't need to be able to mark it as done again. So we can delete out that done button as well. So I come back over here, I refresh, I have item 1, 2, 3. I click on done and it moves it to the bottom, which is what I want it to do. And it removes the done item. So we know it's done. Just one more thing we want to do to make it clear that it is done. We could add in the word done here so it would show up in a separate section of the list. But I'm just going to do some styling. So I'm going to say style equals, and I'm going to say text decoration is strike through. And to be completely honest with you, I do not use that CSS style a lot, and it's not working. So to prove Karen's point, I am going to type in CSS strike through. And I'm going to get text decoration as documentation and scroll down to what the accepted values are.
I think it's line through, isn't it?
Line through. Yep. So I'm going to update that. And the entire point of that was to show you how to use documentation and not to prove that I am not the all-knowing Max whatsoever. Okay, so I'm going to click on done, and now I get a line through it. So we have technically accomplished what we wanted to do. So I am going to come in here. I am going to go to my to-do list, and I am going to cross out add button to check off as done. But we wanted to play around with objects, right? What would be a way that we could use an object to accomplish the same task? What would the object look like? And then I will go back to Carolyn's question around dot entries. So the object could be something as simple as, instead of just saying item 1, we're going to put item 1 in curly braces. And we are going to say the name of item 1 is that string. And then we're going to put a comma in here, and we are going to say done is false. And then we're going to repeat that. We're going to use the same object structure and say the name of the task is item 2, and done is also false. And then we are going to say the name of item 3, and done is false. So that is our new to-do list. And I'm going to come down here, and I'm just going to comment out any of the done items, just so you have reference to that if you do decide you like a 2-array structure instead of an object structure. Okay, so I'm going to save this. I'm going to come over here. Everything's just magically going to work. I'm going to refresh, and I get object, object, object. Okay, well, what's happening here? I put this in a new data structure. And so if we go down to our update HTML, it is looking for the to-do task. Well, to-do task is now an object. So we need to tell it, hey, instead of looking at this object, look at the name inside of the object. So now we're still looping over it, but it's going to look right in the name key and pull out the value, right? So objects have keys and they have values. Name is the key in the object, and item 1 is the value of that key. Same for done. Done is another key in that object, and the value of the done key in the object happens to be false. And so this is a good example of we are mixing and matching variable types inside our object, right? So done is the key, and the key always has to be a string, but the value can be any variable type. It could be a string like we're using in the name. It could be a Boolean like we're using here. It could be a number if we wanted to. Okay, so we're going to come back down to our update HTML, and we have our to-do task.name in there. Okay, so I'm going to save that. I'm going to refresh. Everything's working still. I can click on my edit button, and I'm going to type in ABC, and I hit OK. And now I get undefined. Okay, we're going down a rabbit hole here. I grabbed that thread, and I thought it was just going to be a quick little pull, and all of a sudden, all my code's unraveling. That is okay. Sometimes that is the consequence for not structuring your data right out of the bat. So I'm going to come back into my edit button pressed. And now instead of updating just the to-do list item.index, I need to update the name inside of that index. Okay, I come over here, I refresh, I hit edit, I type in ABC, I hit OK, and I get ABC back out. Now we get lucky on our delete button. If I just hit delete and OK, it disappears. Why? Well, let's go back to our delete button. Because we're removing the index, we're removing the entire object outside of that array. So it doesn't matter. We don't need to remove just the name. We want to remove both the name and that done key. So we're taking the entire object outside of the array. So I know this is a lot. I know the index may, let me put it like this. Do you want to take a break here to catch up, or do you want to work with the done key and then take a break? Thumbs up for a break now. I'm getting only two thumbs up, but I'm seeing a lot of contemplative faces. So let's take a break now. I'm going to just copy and paste this in to the student pasted code channel. And so what we want to do, if you notice on this code up at the top, we want our data structure to be defined like this with our name and our done. And what we want to make sure is that our edit button is working still, and that item two, I'm sorry, and that the item name is showing up in our list. So if you are following along, try and get to that point. Feel free to jump in and ask any questions. We can take a break now and regroup at 7:30, if that works for everyone. Okay. I will leave my screen share up. Let me know if you want me to scroll. This code is also in Slack. We didn't update any of the HTML. We've only updated what's in the JavaScript file. Carolyn, when everyone gets back, remind me to go over dot entries, because I think that will be good for everyone to hear again. But yeah, I don't want to go over all of it and then students get back and not hear it. If you have not stood up in the past hour, or if you have not looked away from your monitor screen in the past hour, I would recommend you take a break, come back in a minute or two, but important to get up and stretch the legs and to follow the 20-20-20 rule, which is every 20 minutes, you look 20 feet away for 20 seconds. Hard for me to do in a tiny house because I don't have anything 20 feet away. However, it's important to look away from your monitor every 20 minutes for 20 seconds. And Susan, just to add to your secondhand anxiety, the tiny house I am in is on wheels. So that hill there, that cliff, there's probably a, I'd say 30-foot drop.
Are you really on a cliff?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, I just thought it looked that way. I didn't know that.
This is the cliff
It's like a
is like
trailer?
yeah, it's the tiny house is on a trailer. And then the cliff is like a retaining wall, and then like it's a 20-foot drop with everything underneath it. So the driveway is like you're like screaming and like slamming on the brakes all the way down, and then you get to this level, and then this level is just drops off again, and it's the rest of the property. So it's like
Wow.
really nice and really secluded, but you are up in the mountains and white knuckling your steering wheel as you are coming in here, hairpin turns and slamming on the brakes, and it is crazy.
Yeah.
I did not grow up in a mountainous area, and I am enjoying driving in here. But it is definitely different when you get off the highway, even on the highway.
Yeah. That's crazy.
people trickling back in. Does anyone want to share their screen of where they're stuck?
It won't let me share.
Go for it.
Move these things out of my way here. All right. All right, so I'm gonna add some stuff, right?
So we actually haven't gotten to add yet.
Oh, that explains it, because the first thing it took, but then next to it said we're undefined.
So edit and delete are the only two things that we should make sure are still working. So if you click on edit on any one of those.
I'm gonna do 3. New name.
Okay, so that is still working. And as long as you've got your to-do list array updated to use objects. So go to your VS Code.
Is he okay?
Yep, scroll all the way up to the top. And yeah, you're good. You're all caught up.
Okay. Thank you. I really need to take the time to look at this, the video from tonight's class and the end product to really get like what is going on, and that will all come together, I'm hoping.
I would encourage you, if you're someone who works well with like printed paper, print out your code and write notes right on it. The other thing you can do is just comment every line as you go, and just add a comment line by line of what makes sense for you, what this is doing, and any ones you don't understand what it's doing, put a question mark there and send it to me, and I'll go in and I'll type those comments in.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yep.
I need to go get some milk. I shall return. Let's see. Did you stop my share? You
I
did,
did.
right? Okay, good.
I was thinking about doing something like that because the videos that I was doing before this class, trying to teach myself, the instructor would like chart out things in kind of like branching style. But I think he wasn't really using functions, so that doesn't really work for that. But he would take those charts and translate them into comments and then do each piece of code beneath the comments. And that was really helpful. So I was trying to think maybe I could search online for like some type of different chart that
yeah, so a term that you'll hear a lot is pseudocode. It's like SUEDO, PSUEDO. And it's pseudocode is just basically like just get your code ideas out there without worrying about syntax, right? So like start loop here over array, that could be pseudocode. A lot of job interviews will use pseudocode where they're like, we don't actually care what language you're using. We just want to see that you can think through a problem and get functions out and get the loops working and the data structure and all of that stuff. So pseudocode is something that's definitely helpful. And then every developer does it a little differently. The task items for me in that Google Doc are enough for me to jump from that right into the code. But it's also helpful to go in reverse sometimes of take my finished code and just pull out line by line and go, okay, that's what this is doing.
Yeah, I wanted something with arrows so I could point to like what's feeding into what, because there's so many things interacting, and that's where I got myself confused last night.
I will try and create something like that on my iPad. Hopefully it won't turn into the jumbled mess that how the internet diagram works did. But I will try and kind of circle things out and point it and post that. And I will be interested to see your feedback on whether that's helpful or whether it's just more confusing.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for me to try to do it myself as well, because then I'd be trying to, review through. I like your idea of printing out the actual code. I hadn't thought of that. So I was
how
I could get into a chart somehow or something, but
it seems silly to do it, but sometimes just being able to draw arrows or even print your HTML on one page and your JavaScript on another and just draw the line across the page. Sometimes that's the best way to do it. And there are times, especially towards the beginning of my career, where I was just like, I can't hold all of this in my head. Sometimes you get it to a 3,000 line program and you're calling functions in a function in another function, and then going all the way back up to the top function and going down into the next function, right? And so the general rule of thumb is that you should never have a function over 50 lines of code. I know some people who say 30 lines of code. And while that seems crazy now to have a function that long, the point of doing that is saying if you're running more lines of code than 50 or 30 or whatever you decide, then you're doing too much in one function. So when it breaks, it's harder to figure out where it's breaking. And so the idea is just like our task list where we were breaking that down, the same goes for our code. You just put it in another function and then name that function something descriptive. So instead of it just saying update HTML, we could break that up into update to-dos, and we could break that up into update done tasks.
Right.
And then we could call both of those in one update HTML function, and that would make our code more modular. So definitely going back, refactoring your code is a good idea. But sometimes printing out a hard copy is what it takes, and that's completely fine.
Maybe also writing out a list of just the names of the function on paper, because when they're further down, I was finding last night you were asking, how can we do something? And I was like stuck on it. And then the answer was to use one of the other functions we'd already written that I'd forgotten that we had written because I was concentrating on what we were working on.
Yeah. So in
It's like a map for you.
Yeah, or just a reminder of what my tools are that I already have. Yeah.
So I have this turned on. I have no idea how I turned it on. But I have this thing called outline down in the bottom of my VS Code. I don't know if you guys have that by default or if that's something you have to enable. But if you scroll down, they have to-do list here and the keys in it. But if you go down, this purple box represents an object, and it will
see your screen.
Oh my. I have outline over here in the bottom left, and up at the top, it shows me like my variable that I have defined and the keys in it. But if I collapse that, it will also show me all the functions that I already had created in my code. And if I double click on one, it will jump me right to that function. Maybe I go to view.
Yeah, I have that too.
Okay, good. So that can be helpful for jumping around as well.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay. Does
Could that
anyone
help
have
us? Sorry, could that help us see errors or no?
I don't
Or it's just showing what you have.
Oh, there we go. I got it bigger.
Let's see if I put an error in. Why is that not erroring out? Oh, because I'm. Get smart about that. No, you're not going to get smart about that. It's funny, you can easily write an error at any time. Let's just do console dot. There we go. Yeah, so it will show that one there. That one is telling you you've got one error in your code right there.
Okay.
I don't personally use the outline a lot. I use a command sequence that's Command Shift F, and that will jump me to search, but that will search across all files in the project that I have open. If you want to search just in your current file, like if I want to jump up to my to-do list, I will just hit Command F and type in let to do and hit enter, and it will take me right up to the top. So that's a quick way to search if you remember exactly what you're searching for. But I don't want to discourage use of the outline. The outline can be super helpful. Okay. So first of all, does anyone have any questions? Want to share their screen? Right now, we should be able to edit an item and type in something and have it work. And we also should have our to-do list up at the top with our objects in it.
I mean, I lost all my buttons, so I don't know what happened.
Okay. You want to share your screen?
Sure. I can see it says it. I mean, it says where my error is, but I don't see it. So hold on. Where's share? Okay. All right. Sorry. Let me show you. This is where.
Okay, so refresh your page and uncheck preserve log, which is gonna. Okay, now refresh your page.
So it says it's at my line 63,
Okay.
which is here.
Okay. And so your look at where your update HTML function is and look at where the starting and closing brackets are.
Oh, it's not, it's outside of it. Oh, it doesn't have one.
Yeah, so that closing one's on 62 and it should be on 64.
Oh, so all of that is supposed to be inside there.
Correct.
Ah, okay. So that
So-
should, in theory. Oh, okay,
Simple as that.
great. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So Carolyn asked a good question of, all right, we've written for loops before, and we've written for of loops maybe before, but what's this dot entries thing doing? So initially what we did is we wrote for const to do task of to do list, and then we just like console log out our to do task dot name, right? And all of that runs fine. The problem is we needed access to the index. In an old school for loop like this, we easily get access to the index, right? To do task index is right there, and we can access that directly. But people love for of loops because 90% of the time, all that you need is the actual value. You don't need the index. In this case, we did need the index. Why did we need the index? Well, we needed to tell the edit button, the delete button, and the done button what one was getting clicked on, right? And so in order to get access to index, we needed to make the index up here. In order to tell our for loop, hey, we would like both the index and the value, the to-do task, we use this thing called object dot, or the array we're working on dot entries. And what dot entries does is it tells you it is returning the number of the index, and it is also returning the task itself, right? The object in the array. So in order to change from just getting the to-do task, we come over to the list, the array, and we say dot entries. And then we come over to the to-do task and we say, heads up, you're getting two things coming out of entries. So we have to use an array. We have to use that square bracket. And we say, hey, you're going to get both the index and the to-do task. And now, in addition to logging out the to-do task, we can also log out the index. So basically, dot entries is allowing us to access the index. Then we have to update our iterator to say, hey, you're getting the index in addition to the value of the task. And then we can access index in our array. Does that help, Carolyn? Okay. And if you were like, what the hell is dot entries? You could always do a Google search for JavaScript dot entries. You always want to include either something that says JS or JavaScript in your query, because sometimes you'll get results and you'll go, that's exactly what I need. but it's in the wrong language. The scary thing is that Google will learn over time that you always are programming in JavaScript and will start just changing all of your results to subtly be JavaScript related results. That's how you know there are a lot of engineers that work at Google. But if you pop open object.entries here and scroll down, they will show you exactly what .entries is doing. This example happens to be for an object. So you may need to go back to Google and say .entries array, and then you will get array.prototype.entries, and it will also show you what's happening on the array there. So always good to lean into your documentation. Okay, so anyone else stuck or want to code share screen? Okay, we will carry on. So our edit button's working, our delete button's working. I'm going to come back to our done button, but one thing I did realize is that our add to do isn't working. So if we type in ABC and hit add to do, we get undefined. Okay, well, that's weird. We updated our HTML to look for the to-do task.name, right? We told it to look inside the object to find it. So why isn't that working? Well, it's not actually a problem in update HTML. It's a problem upstream. It is a problem in our add new task. Our add new task is pushing in our to-do list still the value of the form field. It's not pushing in an object. And so basically, when we get down to update HTML, it's expecting to find the name in an object, and it can't find it. That object doesn't exist because it's a string that we're pushing into the array. So we have to update our add new task and say, hey, when you push in the form field, push it in as an object and push it in the key that is name. And then we're also going to push in the fact that it's not done. So we save that, we come over, we refresh, we type in ABC, and now ABC is working. So that's the line that we changed right there. Okay, we did all of this work. We have our done key in there. That's good. But when we come in here and we click on done, nothing happens. Okay, so let's fix that. We're going to come down to our done button pressed. I'm going to leave all of this commented out because this is the code we used when there was a double array. So any commented code that you see in here, it is an alternative option to how else you could accomplish this task. So what we want to do is I'm just going to console log out our to-do list index. Right, so I'm going to go in our to-do list. I still want to pull out what is in there, and I want to get a better idea of what it's storing under the hood. So I'm going to save. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to click on done on one of them, and it returns out the object that we wanted, right? The name item 2 and then done false. So what we want to do is say, hey, on the to-do list index, access the key that is known as done and set it to true. And then console log out that thing again. So I'm going to console log out the whole array. So I'm going to go back into my code. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to hit done. And I get this thing that has the 3 dots in it. I'm like, that's not helpful at all. What we need to do is click on that little arrow, and then it's going to expand the array for us and show us what is in the array. And sometimes when you've got items nested several levels deep, you need to keep digging down in your objects or your arrays to get to where you want to go. Okay, so we now have item 1 set to false, but item 2 is done true, item 3 done false. Okay, didn't do anything here. So just like we did when we had the 2 array set up, we have to go down to our update HTML and do something here to look at the done key. So what we're going to do is we are going to say style equals, and then we are going to get fancy. Because we're in a template literal, we don't just have to put a variable name in there. We can actually do what is called an ternary operator, which is an inline if. Did Gus go over that? Okay, then I will use it freely. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say text decoration. And then I am going to say, if the to-do task is done, put the word in line through. Otherwise, use the value none. Now, I'm going to run with that for a second, and then I will write that without a ternary. So you guys, in case you're stuck on that syntax.
I'm sorry, Max, you have to do dask.
Thank you.
I didn't know if you did that on purpose to catch us or.
Yeah, of course I did. So I'm going to refresh here. I'm going to say done, and nothing happened. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to debug here because I thought that that was going to work. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to click on my item 2, and I have my text decoration none in there. So I'm like, all right, why isn't that setting? And is something not right here? Or did I do something really dumb and forget to call update HTML? So we can update whatever we want in this function, but unless we tell it after we update the array to also update the HTML, this code isn't going to rerun. So I'm going to save, come over here, I'm going to refresh, I'm going to click done, and we get a nice strike through. Okay, so let me explain this one more time. I can pull this out and I could make this an if statement. I could say if to-do task is done, and I'm going to create something up here that says let style equal an empty string. And I could say if the task is done, style is going to equal line dash through. Else, the style is going to equal none. And then down here, I could drop in the word style. And that is going to run this if statement every time this loop runs, and it is going to figure out whether the style should have a line through it if the task is done, or it's going to set the style to none, which is the default of this variable in the text decoration. So either one that happens here, it is going to drop into my template literal called style. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to refresh, and I'm going require is not defined. How the heck did I do that? VS Code Ghost. I call them gremlins. The gremlins are out to get me. I don't know how that line appeared in there. I must have been typing too fast and imported something I didn't mean to. Okay, I'm going to click here. I'm going to hit done, and it's going to cross it off, and I can hit done, and I can add something new and hit done, and everything's working there. So this if statement is one way to write it, but that is 5 lines of code, and then we reference it down here. So instead of doing all of that, we can inline that with what is called a ternary operator. So the ternary operator breaks down into 3 parts. We first do what is going to be in the if statement. So we are going to say if the to-do task is done, then we put a question mark, which is telling JavaScript, hey, this is ternary. Then we are going to set the style to line through. And if it's not done, we are going to set the style to none. So I'll leave this in here commented out. If that code makes more sense to you, just drop the word style in here, and that's completely fine. This is just a quick way to write an if statement in line, and it is a newer feature of JavaScript. So you will not find older JavaScript developers using this. However, it is a concept in most other programming languages, different syntaxes, but whenever you hear ternary operator, just think of that as a fancy way of saying inline if statement or an inline if else statement. Okay, so I save that. I come over here, I refresh. I'm going to type in A, B, C. I'm going to add the to do. It's in there. I can cross it off as done. Everything's working there. The only other thing that I want to do before we stop for the evening is I want to say, I want to undone that, right? I want to reverse that. So if I click on this done button again, I want it to flip back. So I'm going to come up to my done button pressed, and all I need to do is add a little if statement around this. And I can say, if the to-do list index dot done equals true, then set it to false. Else, set it to true. And either way, update our HTML. So what we did is we just made that done button basically be a toggle. So when we come over here and refresh and we click on done, when we click on done again, it removes that strike through from the list. Now this code can be simplified even further down. So I'm just going to show you what it would take to refactor our code to go back in and clean our code up a little bit. We can also say to-do list index dot done is equal to the opposite, not to-do list index dot done. So we're basically saying, go to the array, get the specific index, the object that I'm working on, look at the done key, and whatever the done key is, use this not operator to flip it to what it's not, and then store it back exactly where we got it from. So this is a more verbose way of saying it. This is completely fine to code out that way. If you understand this way and you do not understand this, that is fine. Use this way. But this is a shorthand way of accomplishing the exact same goal. So I'm going to save. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to refresh and click on done and toggle it, and we're good to go. So I am going to create a quick poll, hopefully. Zoom really needs to make it better at creating polls.
Maybe that could be a capstone project for cohort 3.
Okay, so our options are, we can either steamroll right into Bootstrap and just cram a ton of information in your head tonight, or we can pump the brakes and just stop here, and I can answer whatever questions you have, and you can try and do the homework or catch up to where we're at. This will eventually be due. It won't be homework, just, it won't be due tonight. So poll is open. It's a tight race right now. You guys can see the results, right? No? Okay. Give everyone 20 more seconds to vote if you haven't already. And while people are voting, I'm going to copy and paste the latest code into Slack. And I don't think we updated any of our HTML, so everything is in there. Okay, now can you see the results? Share results? There we go. Okay, so close race, but we will pump the brakes. Democracy wins here. So I will stick around if you guys have any questions. Same thing as always. If you would like to drop out of the room and work on this, and then when you have a question, come back in, you are totally welcome to do that. There is a poll already in the students channel. Oh, I posted that in the wrong. Sorry. The code is now up to date in the student pasted code channel. There was a poll for office hours, and it seemed to be that Friday was winning by a landslide. So we will have office hours Friday from 7 to 8 in this same Zoom room. This is probably not going to be a calendar invite, but just come into this link. I will also post the link Friday so you guys can go from the career session right into this session. So yeah, Friday 7 to 8 for office hours. Thank you guys for filling out that 30-second feedback form. I'm not sure if it's actually taking you 30 seconds, but that feedback has been super helpful for me. And I believe I can maybe convince Jesse that you don't have to do the weekly feedback forms if we just do the 30-second forms every night. How do you guys feel about that form? Do you think that it takes a while to fill out? Do you think that you're okay with it? No objections? Okay, awesome. So I will ask you guys to fill that out again. Is it helpful for me to put that in the Zoom chat, or do you guys know how to access it from Google Classroom? So let me just show you the Google Classroom so I don't have to send it every night. So if you go to classroom.google.com and dump into your right account and go to cohort 2, in classwork up at the top, under feedback surveys, there's the 30-second feedback. And then you can just click on the form from here and it should open it up. But I will also paste it in the Zoom chat in case it is easier for you to get to that way. So as we have voted, I will stop here and let anyone screen share that wants to screen share. Is it helpful for me to leave my code up, or do you guys all have it in Slack? Leave it up. I am going to try and zoom it out one level so we can hopefully fit more of it on. I'm actually going to move this up to here. Yeah, the problem is there's a lot going on in here. I will leave it on the update HTML section, but if you guys want me to scroll that, just let me know to where. But I definitely would encourage you to go into the student pasted code section and just highlight that and copy it. And if you want to create a new file that just says like final code and paste it in there, it may be easier to reference the code in VS Code than it will be to reference it right in Slack. In case you'd like to see my debugging partner, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get the camera down. That's my Stella girl. One quick thing I'll mention is if you are going through my code, it is often better to approach it in kind of the order we approached it in class, as opposed to reading my code from the top down. So I know it's a little hard to remember the order of steps that we did. But if you go from that top down approach, all you're really getting good at is comparing my code to your code, right? And so going through it and thinking through okay, we changed this object. Now let's go through each individual button and make sure those buttons are still working. Okay, no, the add button isn't working now. All right, now let me go look at Max's add code and figure out what's different in there and what each line of that is doing. If you take that approach, it will get you more in that mindset and break down that barrier of, I understand everything in class, but when I start to do it myself, I have no idea where to begin, right? Getting that order down is going to be much more helpful in knowing how to write your own code, as opposed to just having the finished code and trying to get it to work in your own code, which is still beneficial and you're still getting the practice of typing the syntax and understand what it's doing. But following the order we did it in class is definitely beneficial for when you write your own code, because now you know what order to do things in. And if you find you can't remember the order and want to drop out of here, go watch the YouTube video, which you can already see and get the live stream of and rewind, and then come back in here when you have a question or when you get stuck somewhere. That is also totally fine to do. At this point, I would normally play some smooth jazz, but we learned from YouTube that sharing music in a live stream is not a good idea for copyright reasons. So I would encourage you to put on your own jazz or music selection if you find that it's helpful for you. Everyone codes differently. I listen to pop music all day long, pop music and show tunes, and the album will run out, and I'll sit there for like 20 minutes and be like, what feels wrong? Oh, I'm not playing any music, and I'll go in and I'll start playing more music. My previous partner drove him crazy that I played music that had words in it. He could not focus. He was like, I don't understand how you can sing and code. That makes absolutely no sense to me. And so he would listen to like electronic music or like Pure Focus or something more jazzy or, electronic without lyrics, whatever it is. So whatever works. If you're not a music listener, that's completely fine. I find that it only enhances my coding, but just sharing a little tidbit.
Hey, Max?
Yeah.
I sing with the Syracuse Chorale, although I had to drop out a bit towards the end because I didn't have time, but we've been doing virtual concerts because of COVID. We just dropped another was a live performance of pre-recorded on YouTube and Facebook this last weekend. So if people are interested in that, I can put the link to it. It's, Mozart, that kind of stuff, but it came out really well. I'm only in 3 of the pieces, but there's 6 and they're not very long, but it's music that might help some people with coding.
Yeah,
But our
definitely.
group is really small now because, people can't get together and we're trying to do this remotely from home and do our own videos, and it's just been something. But
Yeah,
if anyone's interested, I can share it.
Definitely share it out. If anyone wants it, they can jump right in.
We did it.
I pay for Apple Music. I do find that commercials are the one thing that will break my coding focus. So I have found the $10 a month for Apple Music. I think we pay 15 and everyone in my family gets it. Totally worth it. Spotify does have a student plan. And I'm not sure if Apple does as well. I don't know if they check for .edu email addresses or you can get away with just saying you're a student and get the discount, but definitely worth considering. I used Pandora for years and only stopped that when Apple Music came out. But music is one of those personal preferences where some people can't code without it and some people can't stand to write code while they're listening to it. So whatever works for you.
Where am I? To-do list. No, that's not what I want. Hey, Max or Karen? Or anybody? I'm in VS Code and I've done this before and now I can't find it. I want to split my window top, bottom.
You grab the tab up at the top, and then you just drag it all the way to the bottom of the screen until it has that gray area on the second half, and then let go and it will split it out for you.
Okay, because I know I found it somewhere else too, but okay. Thank you.
You can also probably go up to window at the top, and then you
Yeah.
can tile the window to the left or the right of the screen.
Except I wanted, yeah.
You can also play around with view and move
Yeah.
things around there. But the easiest way I have found is just to grab the tab and drag it where you want it to go.
Thank you. I did it not too long ago and I don't remember where I found it, but there's that rule of when you're stuck, take about 15 minutes, bang yourself on a brick wall, and then ask for help.
Yes,
Oh, thank you.
no problem. Karen may beat me to hitting the enter button there, which will still be good to have that documented in Slack. But the question mark means that it's a ternary operator, which means it's an inline if. So basically it is saying if the to-do list is done, which it looks at the first half of the question mark, and if it is done, then it uses the value right after the question mark, which is line through. And if to-do task is not done, then it uses the value after the colon, which is none. It is essentially doing everything the commented if statement is doing around the style. So it is a way to take those 5 lines with the if statement that sets the value of style and shove it all into an inline operator, all into one line. So if the if statement makes more sense to you, you can delete out everything that's in the curly braces and just put in the word style, and then make sure you've got that if statement above working. But that ternary operator is something you will see in other people's JavaScript code. And it's just a way to write that inline if statement to accomplish the same thing, but just do it all in one line.
It's the true false thing. That's what it is, right?
Correct.
Like the
Yes.
left side's always true. Is that right? Or
So
no?
so think of it as left, middle, right. And if the left part is true, it uses the middle value. And if the left part is false, it uses the right value.
Okay.
So if to-do list is done, that is going to equal line through. If the to-do list is not done, if to-do list is to-do task done is false, it will use the value on the right.
Okay. And what does inline mean?
Inline just means that we're doing it all in one line, as opposed to like doing it on a line above and then dropping that value in.
Okay.
So the easier way to think about like inlined is like inline CSS. So that is inline CSS in that we are setting a style tag and putting the CSS right in the line of our code, as opposed to going to our style sheet, targeting that LI item and setting that code there. So if we did that in the CSS code, it would not be inlined. But if we put the CSS code right in our HTML code, that would be inlined. So we actually used an inlined operation there twice. We inlined the style itself, and then we inlined the if statement. And that if statement inline happens to be called a ternary operator, which is the question mark colon syntax.
So could you, you can hear me, right?
Yes, yeah.
Could you, so if you wanted to not have this, the text, like the CSS here, and you put it only in the CSS sheet, then you would still have to have that question though in JavaScript, correct? Like you couldn't move that over because it wouldn't make sense.
Correct. What
Okay.
you could do if you wanted to not inline the style, for anyone who thinks they are at their saturation point, do not listen. Just keep going on whatever you're working on. But what we could do is we could take this out. Shut that up there for now. We could do something like class equals, and then we could do our ternary operator here that says to do task done. And if it is done, use the class name called line through. And if it's not done, just leave it empty. And then we could go to our CSS and define a thing that says line through that uses text decoration and uses line through. So that would remove the inline of the style, but it's still inlining an if statement with that ternary operator.
Okay.
So if we save that and test it, refresh, and we click done, and it still adds that line through it. But now if we inspect, we can kind of see what's happening under the hood. So you see it has the li class line through.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we look over at our style sheet, it has text decoration line through. So we could even inline, that one level less, and we could go back up here and we could say, if the task is done, call the style line through, otherwise make the style empty. And then in here, we could remove this whole operator and just say class equals style. And so now we're using this if statement instead of that inline operator.
So complicated.
These are all just alternatives.
No,
So-
I know, but that's what I mean. It's like there's so many different ways to do something that it gets complicated to me.
Yes. And so I can, what the benefit of doing it more verbosely is that you can say like, okay, let style equal empty string. I know what that's doing. If the to-do task is done, then make the style a line through. And if the style is not done, just leave it empty. We're going to use the default, right? And then down here, all we're doing is dropping in the style. And so this would be the same thing as if we were writing regular HTML and said li class equals line through. But in order for it to know what that line through means, we have to add it to our style sheet with a class called line through.
Yeah.
And then all this is doing is basically adding the class called line through if it is crossed out. So yeah, tons of different ways of doing it. The more reacty way is to do it this way, where you're inlining the style and then you're using a ternary operator to figure out what style you're applying to it. I get that figuring out and unpacking that one line can be harder than unpacking the 5 lines above it. So the reason I write out those 5 lines above it is to show you that they're accomplishing the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, once you explained it, it does make sense to me. And it does seem more, what's the word? Like concise,
Efficient,
I guess.
concise.
Yeah.
Concise is a better word. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Ternaries are one of those things where like you hate them until you figure them out. And when you do figure them out, you use them everywhere. The downside to a ternary is that you can actually do nested ternaries. And so one thing that we enforce in our style guide at work is that when you go to commit your code in Git, it will reject any nested ternaries and just spit out your code and say, no, you're not allowed to use a nested ternary, because they get so complicated to figure out. Like it's an if else, but then it's an if in the else. And you're like, whoa, syntactically, that is just too hard to pull apart, right? Like looking at to-do tasks, figuring out line through, figuring out none, great use of a ternary. But if you had to like go into line through and then be like, if it was done today, make it a dotted line through. And if it wasn't done today, make it a solid line through. Now you've got a question mark in the question mark, and your brain is like, I can't pull that apart. But if that were an if statement, it would be really easy to go if else and then put another if in the else.
Right. Like it becomes, you can see what you're saying in a, yeah.
Exactly. And so that is something that we enforce in our code, where it's like, don't get smart on us. Like, the computer can understand a nested ternary. If I can't read the code, you shouldn't be using the code. And so there are those little style guide things that we enforce. But it's definitely something you can do. And ternaries are definitely something that you use a lot of once you get comfortable with them.
Yeah, I could see that.
I have a question. This is probably just one of those things where I just have to memorize that that's what it does, or that's how it works. But the most confusing part about that section of the code, whether you do it with the ternary or the other longer if else statement, is how it knows that when you put to do task dot done, how it knows that you want to know that the value of done is true, as opposed to just that there is a value in there.
Yeah, great question. If a value, very, very good question. I'm making sure I'm wording it properly. If it makes more sense for you, you can put that in there, and that will run fine. In JavaScript, there is the notion of a falsy value. So false with a Y at the end of it, falsy. And a falsy value is false. It is the number 0, it is null, or it is undefined. So whenever anything is those 4 values, and there are probably 2 more that I'm missing, but 0, false, null, or undefined, if you put any of those in an if statement, JavaScript will say those are all false. And so what we are doing here is, if you leave off this equals true, it assumes that you mean if it is true. The same thing for up here. We have if task is done. We could also say if task is equal to done, or is equal to true. That would also work completely fine and not cause any issues. So it is a shorthand to basically say, whenever you don't include the equal to part, it will assume that you are trying to compare it to true. And so because to do task done is false, it then knows to come down here and use this because it's part of the else. It is definitely a shorthand. I should have mentioned that earlier, to not include the equals true, but you can totally do that, and it will run completely fine.
I wasn't even sure within that ternary statement where you would put that. I was thinking about, what if you didn't have a Boolean there, if you had like, some other kind of value that you wanted to access. And
yeah, you could do that, and that's a very common thing as well. I mean, that won't work because we're not using the string yes. But right. if we were setting the word to yes, then yeah, that would work there.
Right, or in a totally different context where you're working with numbers or something. Yeah.
Yep. It won't come back to bite you probably at any time in this course, but the fact that JavaScript considers the number 0 to be false will definitely come back to bite you sometime in your professional career. You'll be looking at it and everything will work, and then the first one, like a button, just won't work on any of the first things, and you're like, come on, why isn't this working? And then you're like, oh, it's looking for 0, and that's why you have to like explicitly put out the true or whatever.
Hey, Max?
Yep.
I figured out the way I was getting to that split screen, and I didn't know if it might help anyone else if they hadn't done it yet.
Sure, go ahead, share.
VS Code, well, I'll just tell you because it's not, when you go to VS Code, you say goodbye to the welcome screen, and then you get that blank screen to the right of your Explorer. that's got, it almost looks like a ribbon, you know, that's crossing itself, the black screen.
Yep.
If you just right click, this new file, open file, then split up, split down, split left, split right. But once you have a file open, you can't do that in it. But that's where I was doing it and I couldn't remember where. So you can do it before you open the file. So anyway, that's just one more way and I didn't know if it might help somebody. So
Thank you for sharing.
no problem.
Time definitely flies. I just realized that it is 8:37. So unless anyone has any questions, I'm going to end the meeting here tonight. If you do have any questions, throw them out in Slack. I will try and be responsive either tonight or tomorrow or throughout the weekend. Tomorrow we are going to layer in Bootstrap to this. And then we are going to play around with we're going to make dummy data off the fly with nested objects and arrays and how deep we can go and how we can update that data and all of that stuff. So we will play around with that tomorrow. We will layer in our Bootstrap. And then the weekend assignment will be turning in this to-do list, hopefully with Bootstrap in it. But if you are struggling to get the functionality working, the functionality is much more important than the HTML and the Bootstrap stuff that we'll be layering in. So tomorrow we will dump Bootstrap in here. We will play a little bit more with nested functions and arrays. And then the following week, to give you a heads up, because you haven't gotten rid of me yet, we are going to kind of redo this entire app. But instead of doing this app, we're going to make it as a chat app. So we're going to start with Bootstrap right from the beginning. We're going to get our text box down at the bottom. We're going to make it so you can type in a message and hit send and see that message pop up. And then we are going to play around with like a timeout to send make it show up like a user sent a message. So we will play around with that. We will get into some more custom CSS and getting Flex to work and all of that fun. So yeah, we will be working on that next week. We will be iterating on accessing the HTML in our JavaScript and using arrays and using objects in those arrays and getting our HTML to update, all of that fun stuff. It won't be a functional app because we're not doing anything server side. We're not actually sending the message out on the internet and getting a response back and all of that kind of stuff. But when I come back in June, I believe, we will circle back to that and make that app actually functional. And so you can send messages and get them and all of that fun. So anyway, that is what is coming next week. Reminder to fill out the 30-second feedback form for me so I can get any feedback. If you have any questions or anything you would like to see tomorrow, definitely include it there. And otherwise, I will let you go for the evening.